So how we doing, everybody? So glad that you are here at both of our campuses. I am so excited that you decided to invest a little bit of your weekend with us. I realize that you could be at 1,000 different places, but I think you made the right decision. One of the things that we say a lot around here is that somehow, in some way, we got to figure out how to put God first and most in our life, because everything that is good in our life sort of flows from that. And so I think that you made a smart move by being here. I really do. Are y'all glad you're here? Yeah, anybody? And my hope is by the time that you are done here this weekend, that you'll walk out of here being both encouraged and challenged. Encouraged and challenged. And so many of you are familiar. We're in a little series called the Old School series. Anybody? Anybody? And we sort of left you a little bit with the cliffhanger last week with this guy, right? Cliffhanger, anybody know what I'm talking about? We were talking about American Idols. And no, we were not talking about the show with Simon. Even though, let's just admit something right here. Let's just go public with this. The show was way better with Simon. I mean, he really made the show. I mean, it is true. And the truth is this, is that he was well rewarded for being on that show. Matter of fact, he is one of the richest celebrities on the planet. Look this up, true story. Forbes magazine says that he is currently worth about $550 million and adding about $90 million a year to that. Incredible, all for telling people they're pieces of junk. Right? I mean, it's pretty incredible. And some of you guys think that he was really mean on this show, but he's not really mean on this show. He really is not. Well, I mean, he can be mean, but he's really not mean because he just tells it kind of straight, right? About how bad they really are. I love it. I actually love it because he looks him in the eye and he just says, "You're horrible. You're terrible. There is just no hope for you," right? And really, he is doing them a favor because he's saying, listen, don't spend your whole life trying to become a professional singer when you can't even sing, right? You can't even carry a tune. Do you guys know what the show I'm talking about, right? It's really a great show. And some people go onto the show auditioning thinking that they are the next best thing in America. They think that they can really sing. Well, I know I can't sing, but these people really do think they can sing. And so they come out, make total fools of themselves, and then he just looks at him and says, "You're terrible, you're horrible, and you have no hope," right? And what's interesting to me is this Simon guy is kind of like Jeremiah, the prophet, right? And you know the Jeremiah I'm talking about, right? We've been in this Old School series, and we've been talking about Jeremiah, the prophet from the Old Testament part of the Bible. So if you're not really familiar with this, let me just kind of cue you in a little bit. Some of you may not understand this, but the Bible is divided essentially into two big sections. There's an Old Testament part and a New Testament part, an Old and New. And the Old Testament is everything kind of leading up to the birth of Jesus. And then from the New Testament, it picks up with the birth of Jesus and everything that comes after. And both sections of the Bible are divided into these little books. And it begins with the book of, anybody? Genesis, right? Book of Genesis at the very beginning. And so many years ago in this Old School series, we decided that we were going to try to kind of figure out the whole flow of the Old Testament. And so we started in the book of Genesis, and our heart was very, very simple. We wanted to know the story of God. We wanted to figure out his character, his nature, and how he interacted with human history and how we fit into that story. And let me tell you something, friends. I love the Bible. I love it because it tells me who God is and it tells me who I should be. It leads me to something better in my life. It really does. And so we're in this section that is with a group of books that is commonly called the prophets. And one of the great prophets was a guy named Jeremiah. And who is a prophet, or what is a prophet? A prophet is somebody who is like a pastor, but just bigger and better, right? They are special messengers from God. They are God's voice on earth. They have a very special role to hear from God and then to speak to the people, to bring a message specifically from God to a very specific group of people. And over the last several weeks, we've spent a few weeks getting to know this Jeremiah guy, right? And we learn that Jeremiah has a difficult life and a difficult run, but he is faithful to trying to hear the voice of God and to speak for God. And we learn that Jeremiah comes on the scene in a very changing world where history is literally being shaped around him. We learn that one empire is falling and another great empire is rising. We learn that the Assyrian Empire is literally beginning to crumble, and the Babylonian Empire is coming to power. And not only does God allow Jeremiah to come and live in the middle of this, but he gives Jeremiah voice into this changing world. He begins to speak for God toward the people of God, toward the people of Israel. And he says, listen, if stuff doesn't change, there is this rising empire called Babylon. You don't even hear of them. You haven't even heard of them yet. You don't fear them at all. But they're coming. If something doesn't change, they're going to come and they are going to be great and they are going to crush you if your hearts don't turn. And so about 600 BC, Jeremiah comes on the scene, and Jeremiah says to God's people, listen, imagine this job. He says to them, you're terrible. You're horrible. And if you don't knock it off, it's not going to end well for you. There's going to be no hope for you. Sounds a little bit like Simon, doesn't it? But only the stakes are a little bit higher than some silly singing competition, right? Everything is on the line. He says to God's people like you and people like me, he says your sin, your idolatry, it's going to ruin you. And you know what idolatry is, right? Idolatry is anything that you make out to be God who is less than God, who is not God. Idolatry is when you remove God's top position in your life, that center spot of your life, and you replace it with something else, thinking it's going to somehow satisfy you. And as Americans, we go, wait, we are so lucky we're Americans. And we're so lucky we're Christian people because we would never, ever, ever lower God and move something else to be the top position of our life. And we would never worship silly things that can come and go in our life. Would we? Would we? Or maybe we would, right? And maybe we do. And so last week we started talking about this idea of these American idols that we have, right? And we do have idols. You know, God is supposed to be this top spot. And Jesus, of course, at one point says, he says, you know what you need to do is you need to figure out how to make sure that you seek God first in your life. And everything else that you're trying to satisfy your life with, that'll fall into place. Everything else you're trying to find in life, that'll fall into place. You seek God first. But we have such a hard time seeking God first. We seek other things, right? And one of the top American idols that we have is this thing called the almighty dollar, right? We try to find our fulfillment in it. We literally trust in the dollar. We go, oh, no, in God we trust. Now, come on. Really? As a people? We don't trust that. We trust that. That's what we trust. Here's what we do. We think if we get more of it, that somehow we will be filled. If we can just have the things that we want, certain things, somehow we'll find a soul satisfaction. And the truth is, friends, you know this, that it just doesn't last, does it? For a moment it might satisfy, but this is the problem with an idol, right? It doesn't satisfy the soul like God satisfies the soul. It might be a temporary fix, but it ain't a fix. And the truth is, we think that we'll be happy if we get more of it. We'll be satisfied if we get more of it. But listen, friends, I hope you get more of it. God knows I want more of it. But the problem with money is this. It makes a lousy God. It makes a lousy God. It's a counterfeit God. And we started to talk about Tim Keller's book a little bit last week, where he starts to talk about there are these counterfeit gods that want to prop themselves up in our life and take the place of God in our life. And he said there's some problems, or there's some identifiers, right, with counterfeit gods. He says they're usually good. Anybody remember this? They're usually good. They're generally unreliable. And they're often what? Devastating, right? Generally good. Usually unreliable, or generally unreliable, and often devastating. So just like last week, I'm going to need some help here in the room. Though at both of our campuses, those on my right to your left, I'm going to need you to remember one simple word tonight. We're going to remember the word good. So when I point to you, you folks over here, you're going to say the word good on 3. 1, 2, 3. Good. Not bad. That's pretty good. Way better than last week. Okay, way better. And so folks in the middle, you were very unreliable last week, but this week we're going to step up the game. Okay, thank you. Yes, okay. So folks in the middle at both of our campuses, here we go. I'm going to point to you and you're going to say unreliable. Unreliable. Oh, so much better. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Very reliable. Okay, and folks on this side, we're going to say the word devastating. When I point to you, you're just going to ring it out. You're going to say devastating. Here we go. Devastating. Okay. Good. Unreliable. Okay, and here's the problem with things like money. It's usually a good thing when we get money. But generally, money can be and often it can be, right? And so this is the problem with things. Things disappoint. Things break. Things get dented and scratched and broken. And what is meant to be good, and for a little while it is often good. It's good. But we find out later and often it can be devastating, right? And friends, there is a lot of truth with this. And 2,600 years ago, Jeremiah is led by God to tell his people, the people of Israel, that they were looking to the wrong things that would never satisfy. They appeared to be good, but they were completely unreliable. And it would devastate their soul if they would travel down that road any further. Friends, he warns them. He warns them that not only are they going to lose their nation, but they will lose their soul if they're not careful. And so in a few moments, we're going to get back to this belt that we talked about last week, and we're going to get back to these little things. But what I want to do, if it's okay with you, is I want to take you into another message that Jeremiah brought to his people. And Jeremiah brings this message of judgment and warning, and he calls all these people all kinds of terrible things. And I just think it's a lot of fun as a preacher like me to stand in front of a people like you and call you terrible, horrible, and to tell you to knock it off or it will not end well. No, I don't enjoy that. I'm going to be honest. It's actually terrifying to stand up and to point out things that I'm guilty of and that you're guilty of. But I think Jeremiah's message is a message for today, not just for 2,600 years ago. It is as real and as relevant to us today as it was when he first spoke these words. So if it's okay with you, I want to take you into the book of Jeremiah, and we are going to visit chapter 7. Chapter 7. So if you have a Bible, we'll turn the lights up a little bit, or maybe you have a smartphone and you can do very simple Google search. Just type Jeremiah 7 in, and it's magic. It'll pop right up for you. Jeremiah chapter 7. Now, remember last week, Jeremiah was told to go shopping. Anybody remember this? And he was told to buy anybody? A belt. And this is Jeremiah 13. He's told to go shopping, to go buy a belt. And we thought, this is the craziest thing. Well, this week, it doesn't seem so crazy. He is told to go to church. He is literally told to go visit church, to go to the temple, to go be among God's people. And you think, well, that's a pretty obvious job. He's a preacher. He's a pastor, he's a prophet. He should be hanging out at church. The only problem is he was told to go tell the people during church that they're terrible, that they're horrible, and if they don't knock it off, it's going to end terribly for them. It will not end well. And so he's literally told to go in and talk to the people, and he goes in and he tells them, it's really great that you're in church. It's super that you're in church. It's awesome that you're worshiping God. But the problem is that you don't live like it all through the week. He says, the problem is that you come in here and you're one thing, but out there you live something totally different. He says, you treat people terribly. He says, you treat the poor, the immigrant. He says, you treat the widow and the orphans and you let them suffer. And he says there's no love in the land. And he says that there's no righteousness, there's no holiness in the land. You're running after all of your own desires. And so he goes into church. I want you to think about this. The prophet comes in and says, I want to talk to you. And they're all going, okay, the prophet's here to speak. And he says, listen, you're supposed to be the people of the covenant. Anybody remember we talked about the covenant last week? Anybody with me? Both of our campuses? We said the covenant was like a marriage relationship with God. And he starts to say, and you're like an adulterer. You're out having an affair on me. You're running around. You're breaking the very thing that God wanted to put together. You're supposed to be God's bride. You're supposed to be God's people, and you're not living like this. And he says this in church. Now, this would be like me coming in here, and I'm the pastor, and kind of looking all fly, right? Oh, Jay, I love that. I got a new shirt finally. It's been like 3 years. Man, way to go. And I come in, and I just sit next to you, and I say, it's real nice. You got that little singing thing going on. And you're raising your little hands. And some of y'all got that little, I see you in your worship. You got that little thing going on. It would be like God, or it'd be like me, coming in there and sitting down next to you and going, but you're horrible. You're terrible. And if you don't knock it off, it's not going to end well for you. What if I did that around the room? How would that end? How do you think that would go over, friends? About as good as it does for Jeremiah, right? It doesn't go over. And so Jeremiah is told by God to sound this warning, to let the people know that they are heading completely in the wrong direction. I just want to read some pretty fun verses for you. It's Jeremiah chapter 7, starting in verse 2. Listen to this. He says, hear the word of the Lord. All of you people of Judah who come through these gates to worship the Lord. There's not like our church doesn't have like gates. You come in the driveway and you come in the building and you open the front doors. You're like, oh, you're in church and you expect something. But in the people of Israel, they had a temple, and the temple had like this gate, and it's big, it's formidable, and it's impressive. And you walk in and you go, whew, I'm in church. Something big's about to happen. Something different is going on. And he says this. He says, hear the word of the Lord, you people who come to church. And why do you come to church? To worship the Lord. He says, you've come here through the gates in order to worship the Lord. And this is what the Lord God Almighty says as he's watching your worship. He says, reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. In other words, if you turn it around, you can stay here and enjoy this for the rest of your life. But if not, I promise you, it's not going to end well. Listen to what he says. He says, do not trust in deceitful words and say, this is the temple of the Lord. This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. In other words, woo, I'm in church. Woo, I'm in church. Woo, I love coming to church. It makes me feel so good. And, I love it when Chad, he gets up there and then he turns around and he gets so excited. And, oh, I love it. He says, do not bank on that. He says it takes something different than that. That I require something more than that from you. He says if you really change your ways and your actions and deal with each other, what is this word? Justly. He says if you do not oppress the foreigner or the fatherless or the widow and do not shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not follow, what is this word? Other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land that I gave your ancestors forever and ever. But look, you are trusting in deceptive words that are worthless. The real issue here, friends, is that they are preoccupied with temple rituals. They're preoccupied with religion. They have no concern of the real demands of a real relationship with God. They didn't love people, the vulnerable, the hurting, the suffering, the immigrant, the orphan, the widow, who were suffering in their midst. They had no concern with the holiness of God or the righteousness of God. They were only concerned with satisfying their own basal desires. They were only satisfying what was pleasurable to them. And they did not care about what God demanded from those who claimed to be his followers and his people. They were wrapped up in this thing called idolatry. They were giving God their external worship, but their internal soul was far, far from him. And let me tell you something, friends, God was not happy about this. And poor Jeremiah, he's given this task to be the voice box to God. And you're probably thinking, like me, I'm like, ooh, these people need help. Jeremiah's going to come and he's going to pray for these people. These people need prayer. I think that about some of y'all, by the way. Just so you know. Because I'm thinking about me all the time. But God says to Jeremiah, you're not even going to pray for these people. This is so shocking. Listen to how bad their souls get. Listen to God's response by looking at their lives. They're saying one thing inside of the church, but outside of the church, there's something totally different. And here's what happens. Check this out, verse 16. It says, so do not pray for this people. I thought we were supposed to pray for everybody. God says to Jeremiah, I don't even want you to pray for these people, nor offer any plea or petition for them. And do not plead with me on their behalf, for I will not what? Listen to you. And God says it's too late for these people. Their hearts have become so wicked that they are literally lost. And judgment's coming. They've decided to change a real relationship for fake church. They've decided to change a real relationship with the God of heaven and earth for religion that is false and full of ritual, just to make them feel good. And God says, it's not right. Their hearts are far from me. They're gone. Let me tell you something, people. Listen to me. Just because I have a membership to the gym does not make me ripped. Right? Because why, friends? It takes something more. And just because you have for you who are married, just because you have a ring on your finger that you put there 29 years ago last week for me. 29. Just because this goes on my finger 29 years ago, it does not make me right today with my wife. Because I walked her down the aisle and I said, I love you 29 years ago. Does not mean it's all kisses and love at home. Does it, friends? No, it doesn't. Because it takes something more. And let me tell you something, friends. Because you come to church, even a good church, and I think ours is a good church, it does not make you right with God. It doesn't make you right with God. Let me tell you something, friends. Church is essential. Church is really important. I think that you can't even have a good walk with God unless you love his church and are part of his church. I don't think you'll ever take your next steps with God where he really wants you to go if you are not committed to a local church. I believe that with all of my heart. But just because you come and park yourself in one of our seats, oh, maybe once a month, I'm there like clockwork, doesn't make you right with the Lord of heaven and earth. Because it takes, listen to me, friends, it takes something more than that. And then Jeremiah dials it up and he gives this kind of almost like mocking illustration of what they have become. Listen to this. This is so startling. Verse 17, Jeremiah says this, do you see what they are doing in their towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? So he makes it very personal. He says, this isn't just national. This is where the people live. This is their home. This is what's going on in your home. This is what he says is going on. He says, the children gather wood. Oh, that is so nice. The fathers light the fire. Oh, those are good dads right there. And the women knead dough and make cakes. Oh, I love cake. And here's what they do. They do this to offer to the Queen of Heaven. Anybody catch that? Who does God say he is? He's the Father of heaven and earth. And they were offering their gifts, their sacrifices to the goddesses of the foreign gods who were really no gods at all, and it was a mockery to God. And then it says this, they pour out their drink offerings to what? Other gods to arouse my anger. And this description brings to mind, like this wholesome family is just hanging out for a Sunday afternoon barbecue, and it's all good, and everybody's doing their share of the work. But what Jeremiah is saying, he's saying things are so lost and so bad that it's trickled down into family life, that on an everyday family expression, they are offering sacrifices to demonic gods. And then they show up to church on the weekend. He says it is so broken that they're engaged in cultic worship of false gods. And it wasn't only a misplaced confidence in the temple on a national level, it was demonic idol worship on a family level. Judah, like Israel, had become so thoroughly corrupt that Jeremiah says there is nothing left but judgment. You see, like a child, they were supposed to be devoted to their parent. Like a spouse is supposed to be devoted. They were far from devoted. They were anything but devoted. They rebelled against God. Some of you may remember the backstory that when they left the land of Egypt, they were in slavery, right? And they were like, we're totally for you, God. We're like there. And it wasn't long before they're bowing to a golden calf in the wilderness. And that same rebellious heart continued in their soul from generation to generation. And now in Jeremiah's generation, it had reached a crescendo. And God says, judgment is coming. Listen to how Jeremiah ends his famous and wildly unpopular sermon. This is crazy. This is how far things have gotten out of control. And I need to tell you a little backstory so you understand what's going on, because if you don't understand the context of the culture, you just won't get this, okay? Outside of the walls of Jerusalem, there is this valley called the Valley of Ben Hinnom. And Ben Hinnom literally means the family of Hinnom. So this family named Hinnom owns this valley, and it's a large area. And in this valley, there are little pockets of towns and little people living in different areas, and it's sort of this family name that kind of is over it all. And so in one particular region, they called it a high place. And so what the foreign gods would do, the people of God had the temple, right? But the foreign gods, who were no God at all, they would go to these high places in the mountains and in the surrounding, overlooking the valley, and they would set up these little false temples and these high places of worship. And one of them was called the high place of Topheth, the high place of Topheth. And this is where the people of Israel would go into this valley, and they would walk up the side of the valley, and they would offer their children to the fires of the god called Moloch. And Jeremiah is looking at this and going, it has gone so out of control. Where is your soul? What is wrong with you? Pause. Have you ever had this moment of awakeness where you just go, what am I doing? Anybody? When you just know that you are not where God wants you to be. Anybody in the room? Jeremiah is trying to awaken them. And this is what he says. Listen, verse 31. Right here in church, this is what he says. He says, and you have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it even come to my mind that you would ever do this. Therefore, behold, the days are coming. Listen, there's a prophecy here. He says, this is going to be made right. Your sin, my sin, it is going to be accounted for one way or the other. And he says this. He says, but there is a day coming, declares the Lord, when it will be no longer called Topheth or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but it will be called the valley of, what is this word? Slaughter, for they will bury in Topheth because there is no room anywhere else. And the dead bodies of these people will be food for the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and none will frighten them away. I'm not sure if you are like picking up what Jeremiah is throwing down here, but you know what he's saying, don't you? He says there is a day of judgment coming, and he's already told us that judgment is going to come through an army that God is going to raise up called Babylon. And they're going to come in and they're going to slaughter you, so much so that your normal burial grounds will be overflowing. And so they're going to take all of the bodies of the people and they're going to throw them into this valley, and they're going to stack up, and the birds of the air and the beasts of the field are going to come and they're going to pick away at your body. And listen, it's going to be called the place of slaughter, because this is where you slaughtered your own children. This is where your idolatry reached its pinnacle point. And that will be the place where you will end up. Thanks for coming to church. Have a nice lunch. What a way to end church, right? And we go, well, thank God we're not like that. Bro, that's some heavy stuff. Good thing we don't do the whole idol thing. Well, at the risk of offending just about every single person in this room, can we just talk for a few minutes about a couple more American idols? Because money is not the only thing that we put our trust in, our security in. It's not the only thing that we elevate and pursue above God himself. It really is not. Money is not the only American idol. And I get it. Now, there's some people in this room and you're going like, honestly, Pastor Jay, I'm not really a materialistic person. I'm not into money like that. I'm a people person. I just don't care about money. That might be true. So let me just speak to the three of you who are like that, okay? Seriously, people do say, they go, money means nothing to me. Stuff means nothing to me. People mean everything to me. People mean everything to me. My family is everything. My husband, my kids, they're everything to me. That might be the problem. That might be the problem. Because I think one of the other major American idols is this right here, is just that. It's the people in our life. And this could be, I don't know, your husband, your wife, your kids, grandma. It could be a friend. I don't know, it could be a group of people. But because an idol is anything that we elevate to take the place of God, right? It's anything that we move up the scale and move God down the scale with. And friends, listen, we do this all the time. And what did we learn about counterfeit gods? Because sometimes we can make a god out of the people in our life. Because listen, they're usually what? Come on, help me out. Good. They're usually good. I mean, when you get a new baby in your life, you get like a new friend in your life, you get like husband, wife, whatever, you know. It's usually what? Good. But the problem with humanity is that it's generally and often devastating. I remember when our first little ones came, and when you first get like a baby, it is like your world is rocked. Anybody? You know what I'm talking about? It's like I would come home from work, I'd be working all day long roofing, and I would come home early just to go, where's the baby? Where is the baby? And I'd get that baby and I'd go all night long. You're just like staring, it's slobbering all over you, it's throwing, and you don't even care. Because why? He's perfect. She's perfect, right? And you have all of your hopes and all of your dreams start getting wrapped up in this. But you know, things aren't the only things that disappoint, right? You know this, right? I remember when my son Zachary was 16 years old. And my daughter was, 14 years old. We were in Colorado. Our whole family was there. And on like a little, family outing type of deal. And my son Zachary had gotten his license, and he was like, Dad, I want to drive. Dad, I want to drive. And I was not going to let him drive in the mountains. That's like suicide, okay? That was just not going to happen. But, we're in the city at this point, and so I'd say to him, okay, listen, stop bugging me. You can drive after dinner. So we go to this place called Casa Bonita. Anybody ever been there? Casa Bonita in Denver? Yeah, you don't go there for the food, but you go there for the ambiance. Okay, seriously, the food's lousy, but the place is amazing. They have like these 60-foot cliff divers in the restaurant, like jumping over you, and you're landing in these like pools. It's crazy. People breathing fire, mariachi bands walking around. The food's lousy, but the atmosphere is really awesome. And at the end of your meal, they bring, I don't even know what they're called, but they bring these like, fried donuts dipped in sugar and honey, and it's like glory to God. I don't know. And the cool thing is, it's all you can eat at that point. I mean, they're to keep bringing you desserts. I'm telling the kids, you fill up now because you ain't eating tomorrow. Go, And so we get done with dinner, and Zachary says, I want to drive. I said, okay. I said, you could drive. And so he gets in, and we all get in, and I'm like, buckle down, and kind of deal. And so we pull out into traffic. It's a city, man. I mean, it is like packed out traffic, and we're like in freak out mode already because, he's 16. And so we turn left, and there's like 2 left turn lanes, and he gets in the inside turn lane. And did I mention it was like bumper to bumper? It's like packed, right? And so we're there, and we were kind of having, it's vacation. So we're kind of going easy on the kids, and our kids ate like a kabillion of these like donut things. And so my kids decide like we're going to have a drinking contest in the van. So they're chugging as much water and pop, and they got this little contest going. So Madeline, Lincoln, and Isaac, they're right behind Zachary. I'm in the front seat, and they're right behind us, and they're just chugging all this stuff. And we're sitting there, and we're caught in traffic. Did I mention it was like bumper to bumper? I think I did, didn't I? And so we're sitting there, and we're stopped at the light, and all of a sudden, my beautiful, priceless princess, she starts to make these noises that just didn't seem too healthy at the moment, right? And all of a sudden, she starts like projectile vomiting forward. And Zachary is driving, and did I mention that Zachary's 16? And so he is locked into driving, and all of a sudden he starts to hear this and to feel these things. And so he turns around and yells, "What's going on?" Did I mention that he was 16? I think I did. He, in the process of turning around, he somehow takes his foot off the brake and pushes fully on the accelerator. And so we had about a 5-foot spread between us and the car in front of us, and he just pummels the car in front of us. Let me tell you something. It's not just money that disappoints, right? Sometimes this disappoints. And I love my kids. I got great kids. But some of you had a child that you invested a lot in. You've invested your whole life in, all of your dreams, all of your hopes. And as they got older, they became teenagers. Ooh, right? And it got hard. And then they became young adults. And it was even harder still. And they have dragged you through the ringer because of one poor decision after another poor decision. Our children make lousy gods. They really do. And some of you got married maybe when you were young, and you found a guy that you thought was going to be perfect. And you gave your heart, your soul, and your body to him. And you would do anything for him. You'd go anywhere with him. You were building a life with him. But then one day you started to realize he wasn't who you thought he would be. That he was somebody different. And eventually his heart fell for somebody else who was not you, And one day he starts to shut you out of his life. Let me ask you a question. If he is your life, if he is your hope, if he is your security, if he shuts you out of your life, do you even have a life left? Do you? If you're banking your eternal happiness on him, what usually is generally and often. It's true, isn't it? It's just true. You see, friends, listen, it's hard enough to carry our failures through life. Anybody? It is hard to carry your own failures. But you start carrying somebody else's failures around, it is crushing. God never meant for us to elevate them like that. Never. Let me just tell you one more American Idol. And there's lots of American Idols. But here's one. Woo! The iPhone. iPhone, right? Anybody know what the iPhone is? Y'all know what the iPhone is, right? But that is not a phone. You realize that, right? This is a phone. Let me show you something. This is a phone. Anybody? You remember that old thing with the cord, the whole deal? This is a phone. And you know what this phone does? Anybody? Anybody know? This phone phones people. It literally calls people. That's what it does. This thing right here, that's not a phone. You know what that is? That's your life. It's your accountant. It's your banking system. It's your investment system. It's your Weight Watcher system, right? It's your navigation system. It is your recipe, your cook, right? It is your gateway to the world. It is your connection to the world. And you know what else it is? It's a major problem for a whole bunch of us. It really is. It really is. You think about this thing called social media. You know what social media really is? You know what it really is? Oh, it's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. No. It's bigger than that. You know what social media is? It is your status in this world. It is your status. It tells you who you are and who you are not. And what is generally is usually and often, like I'll post something on Facebook and I think, man, this is great. This is going to encourage a whole bunch. It's going to bring the people together. It's going to bring the people together, right? And it only ends up in a Facebook fight, right? And in our case, picketers out front. It's great, right? Or listen, I see it with my own kids. Instagram. Life is good. Life is good until about 50 scrolls. And then what was such a good life? My life sucks. Because listen, your happiness ends where comparison begins, right? And you're looking at a life that's not even real. And you're trying to measure up against that. Or you, I'll post something and I'll get like, woo, man, I got 150 likes on that. Right? And then I post something else. And I got I got 150 likes in like an hour. I post something else. That thing's been up there for 3 hours. I got 25 likes. What's going on? And here's what happens. Listen, here's what happens. We start to put our value, our significance, our worth based on what other people think about us. And I go, there must be something wrong with that post. It must not be as cool as my other ones. It must not be as hip as my other ones. And then what happens next is I must not be as cool. I must not be as hip as the other guy who got 500. The other guy got 10,000. The other guy got 50,000, right? And we start to play this comparison game and we put our value on this. Here's the problem with this. The world's opinion of you makes a lousy God. Because you will never be as good. You will never be as pretty. You'll never be as rich. You'll never be as tall, as short, as skinny, as thin, whatever you want to be. You will never be as good. It will always be shifting. And the world will always demand more out of you than what you can give it. And it makes a lousy God running after the world. So Jeremiah ends his message to the church by saying, if you are not careful, it will not end well for you. If you keep moving God out of that center spot, out of that top spot, it is going to be a disaster for you. And I want to cue you in on something here because he talks about something that it's hard for us to get our minds around. But this valley of Hinnom, there's something very unique about this that you just need to get this in your mind for a second. It is this place of destruction for those who ran after false idols. And get this, Jeremiah begins to point out what happens there. And he says, this place, this valley of Hinnom, it will become the valley of slaughter. And let me tell you something, Jesus drags Jeremiah's teaching about the valley of Hinnom into the New Testament. and he repackages the understanding of it. Listen to what happens in the New Testament, the Valley of Hinnom in the Old Testament was originally went from Hebrew into Aramaic, and it was the Valley of Hinnom. Very, very simple. We've been talking about that, right? But when it translated from Aramaic into Greek, the early form of Greek, it was translated Gi Hinnom, which meant essentially the same thing. The family of Hinnom owns this valley, okay? But when it was translated into later Greek, it was translated as Gehenna. Now, some of you who are like Bible types out there, you're familiar with this term called Gehenna, aren't you? What does Gehenna become known as in the New Testament? Anybody? Hell. Gehenna is the New Testament word for hell. And in the Jewish mind, Gehenna was this place of eternal punishment of the wicked. It's actually the primary metaphor that Jesus used to talk about this final judgment place. His understanding would have been shaped largely by the teaching of Jeremiah's passage where children were burned because of idol worship. And for Jesus, hell or Gehenna is this final judgment reserved for those who are like Judah, who are running after false gods. And friends, we should not end this way. If anything has shifted in you, if he is not the top, if he's not the center, if something has moved inside of you. I mean, it could be this, it could be addictions, it could be alcohol, I don't know, it could be anger, it could be pornography, it could be, I don't know, status, I don't know. But it will not end well for you. It will not.